The blood on her feet left crimson stains in the white snow, each step a prayer that she would reach Silverton before her body gave out completely. December 1881 brought a merciless winter to the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, and Emma Richardson had been walking for 3 hours since the stagecoach accident that killed the driver and left her stranded 15 miles from town. The other passengers, a wealthy couple from Denver, had taken the only surviving horse and ridden off together, leaving her alone on the mountain pass with nothing but her thin traveling dress and a desperate need to reach her sister before Christmas. Her boots had been stolen 2 days prior at a way station by a woman who had seemed kind at first, offering to clean them while Emma slept, only to disappear with them and Emma's small purse of money before dawn. She had wrapped her feet in strips torn from her petticoat, but the fabric was soaked through now, frozen stiff against her skin. The pain had evolved from sharp agony to a dull, distant throb that frightened her more than the initial hurt. She knew what happened to flesh that stopped feeling pain in the cold. She had seen it once, a trapper who came through her hometown of St. Louis with 3 fingers missing, black stumps where they had frozen and died. The wind picked up, hurling ice crystals against her face like tiny knives. Emma pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little good. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting blood. The road curved ahead, disappearing around a bend of snow-laden pines, and she fixed her eyes on that curve, telling herself that perhaps around that corner she would see the town, the smoke from chimneys, the promise of warmth and safety. But when she rounded the bend, there was only more white emptiness, more road stretching endlessly downward through the mountain pass. Her knees buckled. Emma caught herself against a pine tree, the bark rough and solid against her palm. She wanted to sit down, to rest for just a moment, but she knew that if she sat, she might not stand again. The cold was a seductive thing, making sleep seem like the sweetest relief. She pushed off from the tree and stumbled forward. That was when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow coming up fast behind her. Emma turned, hope and fear warring in her chest. The mountain pass was notorious for road agents, desperate men who preyed on travelers. But surely even outlaws would have mercy on a woman half frozen and penniless. The rider came into view, emerging from the swirling snow like an apparition. He sat tall in the saddle on a big roan horse wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. As he drew closer, Emma could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with several days of dark stubble on his jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. He pulled up short when he saw her, and his expression shifted from surprise to alarm in an instant. "Jesus Christ," he said, swinging down from his horse in one fluid motion. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Emma tried to speak, but her jaw was locked with cold. She managed only a strangled sound. The cowboy was in front of her now, and she could see the concern etched deep in his weathered face. He looked down at her feet, at the bloody, frozen rags, and something fierce flashed in his eyes. "Who did this to you?" he demanded. Emma shook her head, still unable to form words. The cowboy did not wait for an explanation. He sat down right there in the snow and began pulling off his boots, working quickly despite the cold that must have been biting at his hands. "What are you doing?" Emma finally managed to gasp out. "You cannot give me your boots." "Already doing it," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He got the first boot off and reached for her foot. Emma tried to step back, but her body would not obey. The cowboy caught her ankle gently, and even through her frozen numbness, she could feel the warmth of his hand. He unwrapped the bloody strips of petticoat with surprising tenderness, his mouth pressing into a grim line as he revealed the torn, bleeding flesh beneath. "This is going to hurt," he warned, and then he brushed snow across her foot, cleaning away the worst of the blood and dirt. It did hurt, a sharp return of sensation that made Emma cry out. But the cowboy's hand on her ankle was steady, grounding her. He worked quickly, cleaning both feet before sliding his boots onto them. They were far too large, warm from his body heat, and lined with sheepskin that felt like heaven against her frozen skin. "There," he said, standing and stamping his feet in just his thick wool socks. "That will get you to town." "But you," Emma protested weakly, "you will freeze." The cowboy gave her a lopsided smile that transformed his stern face into something unexpectedly handsome. "I have got thicker skin than you, miss, and we are not walking anyway." Before Emma could process his meaning, he bent and scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at his coat. "I can walk," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Not fast enough," he replied, carrying her to his horse. "The storm is getting worse, and we need to make town before dark." He settled her sideways on the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist to hold her secure. The contact was improper, scandalous even, but Emma could not bring herself to care. The heat radiating from his body was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt. The cowboy urged his horse forward, and they began moving at a careful but steady pace down the mountain road. He held her close against his chest, using his body to shield her from the worst of the wind. "Name is James," he said after a few minutes. "James Cartwright." "Emma Richardson," she replied, her voice muffled against his coat. "Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. You saved my life." "Just James," he said, "and I have not saved it yet. Need to get you warm and get those feet looked at properly." Emma felt herself beginning to shiver violently now, her body finally registering the warmth and starting to thaw. James held her tighter, murmuring reassurances she could barely hear over the chattering of her teeth. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me how you ended up out here alone." So Emma told him, her words coming in fits and starts, about the stagecoach accident and the passengers who abandoned her, about the woman who stole her boots and money, about her sister Margaret, who lived in Silverton and was 8 months pregnant with her first child. "I have not seen Margaret in 3 years, Emma said, "not since she married and moved west. When she wrote saying the baby was coming and asking me to be there, I saved every penny from my seamstress work for 6 months to afford the journey. I cannot fail her now." James was quiet for a moment, and Emma felt his arm tighten fractionally around her waist. "You will get there," he said, and there was such certainty in his voice that Emma believed him. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clopping of the horse's hooves and the whistle of wind through the pines. Emma found herself growing drowsy, lulled by the warmth and the rhythmic sway of the horse. She let her head rest against James's chest, feeling the solid thump of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "Do not fall asleep," James said, giving her a small shake. "I need you to stay awake until we get to town." Emma forced her eyes open. "Tell me about yourself, then. Keep me awake with your story." She felt more than heard his quiet laugh. "Not much to tell. I run cattle up on the high meadows during summer, work odd jobs in town during winter. Got a small cabin outside Silverton, grew up in Texas, but my folks passed from fever when I was 16. Been on my own since then." "That is a very lonely story," Emma said softly. "Lonely is not so bad," James replied. "A man gets used to it." "A man should not have to get used to it," Emma argued. "People are meant to have family, connections." "What about you?" James asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. "You said you have been working as a seamstress. Where is your family besides your sister?" Emma felt the familiar ache in her chest. "My parents died too. My father in the war, my mother 2 years later from pneumonia. It has been just Margaret and me for a long time. But then she met Robert, and they fell so in love. I could not ask her to stay for me when her happiness was waiting here in Colorado. So I stayed in St. Louis and told myself I was content. But I have been so lonely without her." Her voice broke on the last word, and she felt James's hand move, rubbing her arm in a gesture of comfort. "You are a good sister," he said quietly, "making this journey alone, especially in winter. She is lucky to have you." They crested a rise, and suddenly the wind died down. blocked by a high ridge to the west. In the distance, Emma could see smoke rising against the white sky. "Silverton," James said, and Emma felt relief crash over her so powerfully she felt dizzy with it. The town materialized slowly from the snow. First just a scattering of buildings, then the full sprawl of it nestled in a valley between towering peaks. It was a mining town, rough and practical, with a main street lined with false front buildings and side streets branching off in haphazard directions. Even through the storm, Emma could hear the distant sound of the stamp mills processing ore, a constant thunder that echoed off the mountains. James guided his horse down the main street, past the assay office and the mercantile, the saloons and boarding houses. A few people braved the weather, hurrying from building to building with their heads down against the wind. They stared as James and Emma passed, clearly curious about the cowboy riding in his socks with a half-frozen woman in his arms. "Where does your sister live?" James asked. Emma gave him the address from memory, and James turned his horse up a side street toward the residential area where the mine managers and successful merchants kept their homes. Margaret's husband Robert was a mining engineer, well paid and respected, and they lived in a neat white house with green shutters and a front porch. James pulled up in front of the house and dismounted, then carefully lifted Emma down. Her feet screamed in protest when they touched the ground, even protected by his boots, and she swayed dangerously. "I have got you," James said, and he swept her up into his arms again and carried her up the porch steps. He knocked on the door with his boot, 3 solid thumps. The door swung open, and there was Margaret, her belly round and full under her apron, her dark hair pinned up in a simple bun. Her eyes went wide with shock. "Emma?" she gasped. "Oh my God, Emma!" "She needs warmth and medical attention," James said without preamble. "Her feet are badly frostbitten. Can I bring her inside?" Yes, of course," Margaret said, stepping back quickly. Bring her to the bedroom." James carried Emma through the tidy parlor and down a short hallway to a bedroom with a large brass bed covered in quilts. He laid her down gently, then stepped back, suddenly seeming awkward in the domestic space. Margaret was already bustling around calling for her husband Robert, demanding hot water and bandages. Robert appeared, a tall man with spectacles and kind eyes, and after one look at Emma's feet, he sent a boy running for the doctor. In the flurry of activity, James began backing toward the door. "Wait," Emma said, struggling to sit up. "Please do not go. I have not even thanked you properly." James paused, his hand on the doorframe. His feet were red with cold, she noticed with guilt, and his socks were soaked through. "No thanks needed," he said. "Just glad I came along when I did." "You gave me your boots," Emma said, looking down at them, far too large on her feet. "You need them back." "Keep them for now," James said. "You need them more than I do at the moment. I will come by tomorrow to check on you, if that is acceptable to your sister." He looked at Margaret, who was staring at him with open curiosity and gratitude. "Of course," Margaret said warmly. "Please, sir, at least let me give you something for your kindness. Robert, give this man some money." James held up a hand, his expression going firm. "I do not want money. I will take back my boots when your sister is healed enough not to need them, and that is all." Before anyone could argue further, he was gone, slipping out of the room and down the hallway. Emma heard the front door open and close, and then the sound of hoofbeats fading into the snow. "Well," Margaret said, sinking down onto the edge of the bed and taking Emma's hand, "that was the most romantic thing I have ever witnessed, and I'm including my own courtship." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her returning warmth. It was not romantic. He was being kind. "He gave you the boots off his feet, Emma, in a snowstorm, and then carried you for miles." Margaret squeezed her hand, her eyes suspiciously bright. "That is the kind of man you read about in novels." The doctor arrived then, an older man with a gray beard and a brisk, efficient manner. He examined Emma's feet thoroughly, cleaning and bandaging the worst of the cuts and abrasions. The frostbite was not as severe as it could have been, he told her, thanks to the quick intervention with the boots. She would need to stay off her feet for at least a week, keep them elevated and warm, but he expected she would make a full recovery. After the doctor left, Margaret helped Emma into a warm nightgown and tucked her into bed with hot bricks wrapped in flannel at her feet and a cup of honeyed tea in her hands. Then she settled into a chair beside the bed and fixed Emma with a determined look. "Now," she said, "tell me everything about that cowboy." Emma laughed, feeling the tension of the day finally beginning to drain from her body. "There is nothing to tell. I do not even know him. His name is James Cartwright, and he runs cattle in the summer and works odd jobs in winter, and that is all I know." "But you like him," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. "I saw the way you looked at him." "I am grateful to him," Emma corrected, though her heart was beating faster at the memory of being held in his arms, warm and safe against his chest. "There is a difference." Margaret said, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he said he would come back tomorrow. We will see what we see." Emma tried to protest, but Margaret just smiled and changed the subject, asking about the journey from St. Louis and catching Emma up on all the news of her life in Silverton. They talked until Emma's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion of the day finally overtaking her. Margaret kissed her forehead and slipped out, leaving Emma to sink into the first real sleep she had had in days. She dreamed of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, of being carried through snow by someone who made her feel safer than she had felt in years. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Emma woke to sunshine streaming through the lace curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the kitchen. Her feet ached, but it was a clean, healing ache rather than the desperate agony of the day before. Margaret brought her breakfast in bed, chattering happily about Christmas preparations and the baby coming. Emma learned that Robert was well respected in town, that they had made good friends among the mining families, that Margaret was nervous but excited about becoming a mother. It was good to see her sister so happy, so settled in her life. It made the long, difficult journey feel worthwhile. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the front door. Emma's heart jumped into her throat, and Margaret gave her a knowing smile before going to answer it. She heard Margaret's warm greeting, then the lower rumble of a male voice that made her pulse quicken. Footsteps approached down the hallway, and then James appeared in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking scrubbed clean and slightly uncomfortable. He was even more handsome in the daylight, Emma thought. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his jaw freshly shaved, revealing a strong jawline and a small dimple in his chin. He wore clean denim trousers and a blue work shirt that brought out the gray in his eyes. "Morning," he said, nodding to Emma. "I came to check on you, see how you are healing." "I am much better, thanks to you," Emma said, wishing desperately that she was not lying in bed in her nightgown with her hair in a braid over her shoulder. "The doctor said I will recover fully." Relief washed over James's face. "That is real good news. I am glad." An awkward silence fell. Margaret, who had been lingering in the doorway, cleared her throat. "Mr. Cartwright, have you had breakfast? I have just baked fresh bread, and there is plenty of coffee." James looked torn, clearly not wanting to impose, but Margaret was already ushering him back toward the kitchen, insisting he must be hungry. Emma heard them talking, Margaret's warm chatter and James's quieter responses, and she felt a keen sense of frustration at being bedridden. But an hour later, Margaret brought James back to the bedroom doorway, and he held out a wooden tray. "Your sister said you might like to have lunch with a view of something other than these four walls," he said, "if you were up for sitting in the parlor for a spell." "I would love that," Emma said gratefully. James set the tray aside and came to the bed, and once again he lifted her easily into his arms. Emma was intensely aware of the strength in his shoulders, the clean scent of soap on his skin. He carried her to the parlor and settled her on the sofa, propping her feet on a cushioned stool and covering her with a quilt. Then he brought the tray, laden with sandwiches and fruit and coffee, and to her surprise, he pulled up a chair and sat with his own plate. "Hope you do not mind company," he said. "Your sister is feeding Robert his lunch in the dining room, and she suggested I might keep you entertained." Emma smiled. Margaret is not subtle in her matchmaking. James choked slightly on his coffee, then gave her a rueful grin. I noticed that. She asked me at least 5 times in the kitchen if I was married or courting anyone. I am sorry, see, Emma said, feeling her cheeks heat. She means well. No need to apologize, James said. To tell you the truth, I have not had anyone care enough about my personal business to meddle in it for a long time. It is kind of nice. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, then James said, Your sister told me you are a seamstress, that you make fine dresses for the wealthy ladies in St. Louis. I do alterations and mending mostly, Emma said. The occasional dress for special occasions. It is honest work, but not particularly exciting. Do you enjoy it? Emma considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. I enjoy the precision of it. Making something fit perfectly. Seeing the way a good alteration can transform a garment. But no, I suppose I do not love it. It is simply what I know how to do. If you could do anything, James said, what would you choose? Emma was startled by the question, by the genuine curiosity in his eyes. I have never really thought about it. Women do not often get to choose. But if you could, James pressed gently. Emma looked out the window at the bright December day, at the mountains rising stark and beautiful against the blue sky. I think I would like to do something outdoors. I have spent so much of my life in small rooms, bent over fabric in dim light. I would like to feel the sun on my face, to have space around me. James smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I understand that. It is why I like the cattle work. Being up in the high meadows in summer, nothing but sky and grass and mountains, makes you feel small and big at the same time, if that makes sense. It does, Emma said softly, and their eyes met and held. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Emma could not quite name. Then James cleared his throat and looked away, setting his empty plate on the tray. I should get going, he said. I've got work at the livery stable this afternoon. Disappointment flooded through Emma, but she nodded. Thank you for checking on me and for keeping me company. James stood, then paused. I will come back tomorrow if that's all right, just to see how you are healing. I would like that, Emma said, and the smile that broke across James's face made her breath catch. True to his word, James came back the next day, and the day after that. Each visit lasted a little longer than the last. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to philosophy to favorite books. Emma learned that James had taught himself to read from a tattered Bible and whatever dime novels he could trade for. James learned that Emma had once dreamed of being a teacher, but there was no money for the training. Margaret and Robert, with admirable tact, found reasons to be elsewhere during these visits, giving them privacy while still maintaining propriety. On the 4th day, James brought a small package wrapped in brown paper. I thought you might be getting bored, he said, handing it to her. Figured you might like something to read. Emma unwrapped it carefully and found a book, its cover worn soft with use. Little Women, she read aloud, then looked up at James in surprise. This is a woman's book. James looked embarrassed. I found it left behind at a boarding house a couple years back. Read it myself, actually. Thought it was real good. The way it talked about family and sacrifice and finding your own way reminded me some of you and your sister. Emma felt something warm and sweet unfold in her chest. The fact that this tough, solitary cowboy had not only read a book about 4 sisters growing up during the Civil War, but had thought of her while remembering it, touched her more than any grand gesture could have. Thank you, she said, her voice soft. This is incredibly thoughtful. Over the next few days, as Emma slowly healed and began to put weight on her feet again, she and James fell into an easy rhythm. He would arrive each afternoon after his work was done, often bringing small gifts, a pretty rock he had found on a ride, a hair ribbon from the mercantile, a bag of peppermints to share. They would sit together in the parlor or on warmer afternoons on the front porch and talk for hours. Emma found herself watching the clock as the afternoon approached, her heart lifting at the sound of his boots on the porch steps. She noticed things about him. The way he listened with complete attention when she spoke, The gentleness in his hands despite their calluses and scars, the dry humor that surfaced when he was comfortable. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes, his storm-gray eyes soft with an emotion that made her pulse race. On Christmas Eve, just over 2 weeks after her arrival in Silverton, Emma was finally able to walk without pain. The doctor had declared her healed, though he advised her to continue wearing comfortable, well-fitted boots for several more weeks. James arrived that afternoon with a large box under his arm and a nervous expression on his face. "I know it is not proper," he said, before Emma could even greet him. "And I know we have only known each other a short time. But I saw these, and I could not stop thinking about how you would need your own boots, and how mine were far too large, and well, I hope you will accept them." He thrust the box at her, and Emma opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a pair of women's boots made of soft brown leather with sturdy soles and neat button closures. They were practical but well made, the kind of boots that would last for years. Emma looked up at James, tears stinging her eyes. "You bought me boots." "I bought you boots," he confirmed, his voice gruff. "Figured after what you went through, you should have a proper pair. The mercantile owner helped me with the sizing based on the measurements from my boots when you wore them." Emma set the box aside and stood, stepping close to James. He was a head taller than her, and she had to tilt her face up to meet his eyes. "No one has ever given me such a perfect gift," she said. "Thank you, James." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Emma," he said, his voice low and intense, "I know I'm just a cowboy with a small cabin and no real prospects. I know you come from the city and you are educated, and you deserve someone who can give you a fine house and pretty dresses. But I have come to care for you these past weeks more than I have ever cared for anyone. You make me want things I never let myself want before. A home, a family, someone to come back to at the end of the day. If you think you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would like permission to court you properly." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "James Cartwright," she said, "I have been falling in love with you since the moment you sat down in the snow and gave me your boots off your own feet. I do not care about fine houses or prospects. I care about kindness and strength, and the way you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. So yes, you have permission to court me, though I think we are a bit past the formalities at this point." Joy blazed across James's face, transforming him into someone young and almost carefree. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish you would," Emma whispered. He kissed her there in Margaret's parlor, gentle at first, then deeper as Emma's arms came up around his neck. He tasted like coffee and peppermint, and his lips were soft despite the rough stubble on his jaw. Emma felt like she was melting, like every cold, lonely part of her was finally thawing in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you," he said. "I know it is too soon to say that out loud, but I'm going to marry you, Emma Richardson, if you will have me." "Yes," Emma said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will have you." They spent Christmas Day with Margaret and Robert. The four of them crowded around the dining table for a feast of roasted chicken and potatoes and pie. James brought his guitar, which Emma had not known he owned, and played carols while they sang together. It was the best Christmas Emma could remember, filled with warmth and laughter and the constant awareness of James beside her, his hand finding hers under the table, his eyes meeting hers across the room. In the days that followed, James and Emma were rarely apart. He took her riding on his gentle mare, showing her the beautiful country around Silverton, the ice-locked rivers and snow-draped forests, the mountain meadows that he promised were carpeted with wildflowers in summer. He brought her to his cabin, a small but sturdy structure he had built himself, with a stone fireplace and windows facing the sunrise. Emma could picture a life there, picture herself making curtains for those windows, cooking at that fireplace, waiting for James to come home at the end of the day. On New Year's Day, 1882, James asked Robert's permission to marry Emma, a formality since Robert was not her father or even her legal guardian, but one that James insisted on out of respect. Robert gave his blessing enthusiastically, and Margaret cried happy tears and started planning the wedding immediately. They were married on a clear, cold day in February in the small church at the center of Silverton. Emma wore a dress she had made herself, working late into the night by lamplight, fashioning pale blue wool into a gown with simple, elegant lines. James wore his one good suit, bought specially for the occasion, and he looked so handsome Emma's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Margaret stood beside her, one hand on her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face. Robert stood with James, and a handful of townspeople who had come to know and like the quiet cowboy filled the pews. When the preacher asked if James took Emma to be his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out clear and certain, echoing in the small church. And when Emma said the same words, promising herself to this man who had given her his boots and carried her through the snow, who had given her his heart with the same quiet generosity, she meant them with every fiber of her being. They kissed in front of the whole congregation, James's hands cradling her face like she was something precious and breakable, Emma rising on her toes in the new brown boots he had given her at Christmas. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Emma moved into James's cabin, and together they made it into a home. She sewed curtains and cushions, planted herbs in pots on the windowsills, arranged their few books on a shelf James built. He showed her how to split wood and tend the fire, how to recognize animal tracks in the snow, how to ride properly instead of just being carried along. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small accommodations and compromises of sharing a life. In March, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Thomas. Emma was there for the birth, holding her sister's hand through the long hours of labor, and when she finally placed her nephew in Margaret's arms, she felt a yearning so strong it took her breath away. She wanted this, wanted to give James a child, wanted to build the family they had both been missing for so long. She shared this with James that night, lying in his arms in their bed with moonlight spilling through the window. "I want to have your baby," she whispered against his chest. She felt his arms tighten around her, felt the catch in his breathing. "You do?" "I do. I want to give you a family, James. I want to fill this cabin with children and love and life." He rolled to face her, his eyes bright even in the darkness. "I want that too. I have wanted it since the day you said you would marry me. I just did not want to rush you." Emma smiled and pulled him close. "I am not feeling rushed. I am feeling right where I am supposed to be." Their first child was conceived that night. Emma was certain of it. She felt different in the weeks that followed, as if something fundamental had shifted inside her. When her courses did not come, she visited the doctor, who confirmed what her body had already told her. She would have a baby in late autumn, around November if his calculations were correct. She told James over dinner, watching his face. As the meaning of her words sank in, he went very still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "A baby?" he said, his voice strange. "We are having a baby?" "We are having a baby," Emma confirmed, and then she was in his arms, lifted right out of her chair, and James was spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and told him to put her down before he made her dizzy. He set her down carefully, then dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your pa. I just want you to know that I am going to love you and your ma with everything I have got. You are already the luckiest kid in Colorado because you are getting Emma Richardson Cartwright for a mother, and she is the finest woman who ever walked this earth." Emma ran her fingers through his hair, tears rolling down her cheeks. "And you are getting James Cartwright for a father, and he is the best man I have ever known." The pregnancy was not easy. Emma was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. James was endlessly patient, bringing her dry toast and ginger tea, holding her hair back when she was ill, sitting with her in the cool evenings when that was the only time she felt halfway normal. As her belly grew, she found the altitude difficult, getting winded from simple tasks. But James was there for all of it, taking over the heavier chores without complaint, rubbing her aching back, reading to her in the evenings from their small collection of books. In July, James left for his summer work driving cattle to the high meadows. It was the first time they had been apart since their marriage, and Emma felt his absence like a physical ache. But he had arranged for her to stay with Margaret and Robert in town, not wanting her to be alone in the cabin while she was pregnant. The extra money from the cattle work would be essential once the baby came. He was gone for 6 weeks, and when he finally rode back into town in late August, bearded and trail-worn, Emma ran out of Margaret's house and threw herself into his arms before he had even dismounted. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him shaking. "Missed you," he said roughly. "Missed you so much." "I missed you too," Emma said. "It was horrible." He pulled back and placed his hand on her rounded belly, his eyes widening. "You have grown." "The baby has grown," Emma corrected, laughing. "I am just the one carrying it." That night, back in their own cabin, the baby kicked for the first time. Emma gasped and grabbed James's hand, pressing it to the spot. They waited, barely breathing, and then it came again, a distinct little thump against his palm. James's face was a picture of awe. "That is our baby." "That is our baby," Emma agreed. In November, 2 weeks before Emma's calculated due date, the pains started. James rode like mad to fetch the midwife and the doctor, then paced the cabin like a caged animal while Margaret and the midwife attended to Emma. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. James later told Emma that it was the longest 20 hours of his life, hearing her cries from the bedroom and being unable to help. But finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry rang out. The midwife emerged, smiling, and beckoned James into the bedroom. Emma lay propped against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," Emma said softly. James approached like he was walking on holy ground. Emma pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, a cap of dark hair plastered to his head. "A boy," James said, his voice breaking. "We have a boy." "We have a boy," Emma confirmed. "I thought we could name him Samuel after your father." James sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to take his eyes off his son. "Samuel Cartwright. It is perfect." He reached out a finger, and the baby's tiny hand closed around it, holding tight. James made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "He is holding my hand," he said, wonderstruck. "He knows his paw," Emma said, leaning her head against James's shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, as the last light faded from the windows and the stars came out over the mountains. The years that followed were full and busy. Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious, energetic toddler. Emma discovered that she loved motherhood, loved the way each day brought new challenges and small triumphs. James was a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching Samuel to walk and ride, telling him stories in the evenings. When Samuel was 2, Emma became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1885 she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, called Katie by everyone. She had Emma's dark hair and James's gray eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. James expanded the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He had steady work now, a reputation as a reliable hand and an excellent horseman. Emma took in sewing occasionally, more for the creative outlet than the money, making dresses for the mining families and alterations for the general store. In 1887, their third child arrived, another boy they named William. And in 1890, Emma gave birth to twin girls, Rose and Lily, completing their family. The cabin was chaos most of the time, filled with the noise and energy of 5 children, but it was also filled with love, with laughter, with the kind of deep contentment that came from building something meaningful together. Emma and James would sometimes look at each other across the dinner table, surrounded by their children, and share a smile that communicated everything they felt: gratitude, wonder, and a love that had only deepened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Emma riding up to the high meadows. It was summer, and the wildflowers were in bloom just as he had promised her years ago. They spread a blanket and sat together, looking out over the valley with Silverton spread below them. "Do you remember the day we met?" James asked, taking her hand. "Every detail," Emma said. "I was so cold, so scared, and then you appeared like something out of a dream." "I knew right then," James said. "The moment I saw you standing in the snow, so brave and determined, I knew you were going to change my life." Emma leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder under her cheek. "You gave me your boots." "Best trade I ever made," James said. "A pair of boots for a lifetime with you." Emma laughed. "That is quite a return on investment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the clouds cast shadows across the mountains. Emma thought about the journey that had brought her here: the stagecoach accident, the stolen boots, the desperate walk through the snow. At the time, it had felt like the worst luck in the world. But if none of that had happened, she would never have met James. She would never have known this life, this love, these children. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "That I would walk barefoot through 100 snowstorms if it meant finding you at the end," Emma said. James turned and cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle as it had been the first day when he cleaned her frozen feet in the snow. "You will never have to," he promised. "I will keep you warm for the rest of our lives." He kissed her there in the meadow, with wildflowers all around them and the sky endless overhead, and Emma felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt in Margaret's parlor all those years ago. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joys and sorrows. They lost Margaret to childbed fever when her 4th baby was born, a loss that devastated Emma. But they took in Margaret's children, raising them alongside their own, and in that way kept her memory alive. Robert remarried eventually, a kind widow who loved his children as her own, and remained close friends with Emma and James. Samuel grew tall and strong, eventually taking over his father's cattle business. Katie married a school teacher and moved to Denver, though she visited often with her own growing family. William became a mining engineer like his uncle Robert. Rose and Lily, inseparable since birth, opened a dress shop together in Silverton, with Emma teaching them everything she knew about sewing and design. James's hair went silver at the temples, then white. Emma's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life spent smiling and laughing. But when James looked at her, he still saw the brave young woman walking barefoot through the snow. And when Emma looked at James, she still saw the cowboy who had given her his boots and carried her to safety. On the 50th anniversary of the day they met, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Someone had found the original boots, the ones James had given Emma that day in the snow, carefully preserved in a trunk. They were cracked with age now, the leather stiff, but Emma held them in her lap like treasure. "Tell us the story, Grandma," one of the grandchildren begged. "Tell us how you and Grandpa met." So Emma told them, with James adding details and corrections about the blizzard and the stagecoach accident, about the walk through the snow and the cowboy who appeared like an answer to a prayer. The children listened with rapt attention, as they always did, though they had heard the story dozens of times. "And then what happened?" the youngest asked, even though she knew the answer. "And then I fell in love," Emma said, reaching for James's hand, "and I have been falling more in love every day since." James squeezed her hand, his eyes bright. "Me too," he said softly. "Me too." As the celebration continued around them, Emma looked at the life they had built. The children and grandchildren, the home filled with love and laughter, the partnership that had sustained them through 50 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship. She thought about that desperate girl in the snow. Sure, she was going to die alone on a mountain pass, unable to imagine the beautiful life that was waiting just around the bend. She leaned close to James and whispered in his ear, "Thank you for your boots." James smiled, that same lopsided grin that had charmed her all those years ago. "Thank you for letting me carry you," he whispered back. They sat together as the afternoon light slanted golden through the windows, hands clasped, hearts still beating in rhythm after all these years. Two people who had found each other in the snow and built a love that could weather any storm. Two people who had discovered that sometimes the worst moments in life lead directly to the best ones, that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find your way home. Outside, the mountains stood eternal against the sky, the same peaks that had witnessed their first meeting and every day since. Inside, surrounded by the family they had created, Emma and James Cartwright held each other close and counted their blessings, knowing that the greatest adventure of their lives had started with a simple act of kindness on a snowy mountain road, and that the love born that day would outlast them both, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their story forward into the future. And in a place of honor on the mantelpiece, carefully preserved behind glass, sat a pair of worn brown boots, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the smallest gestures, and that true love is built not in grand moments, but in the quiet choice to give someone else your boots and carry them when they cannot walk on their own.